A lot of people are talking about the tariffs, Donald Trump's tariffs, in terms of historical context, where you have the Smoot-Hawley tariff back right around the Great Depression. Some people are predicting that we're headed into a Great Depression. Donald Trump likes to bring up the 1890s, where we had tariffs, in excess of 40% in some cases. He claims that was a instigator for a great amount of American prosperity. So where's the truth here? Are we headed for a Great Depression, or are we headed for a golden age?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of interesting history here, and there is a lot of good history about tariffs because this did used to be the primary source of revenue, almost the only source in the early part of the country of revenue for the federal government. So we could talk about the history a little bit, but I don't think we're going into another Great Depression because I think you have to do a lot of other bad things. Got to have bad monetary policy, bad tax policy, and bad tariff policy to get into a Great Depression. But it could certainly, and I think it will, cause big declines in consumer spending and perhaps business investment, and those are the things which push you into recessions. So if we think about like I said, the history of the U.S. When the country first starts, tariffs are the main source of revenue for the federal government. In fact, almost the only source until after the Civil War, because that is what most countries have used historically. It's a tariff, it's a tax that's pretty easy to collect for lots of administrative reasons. If you only have a few points of entry into the country, the goods come in, especially when only ships are the only form of transportation. So we did use it early on. And the tariff rates in U.S. history used to be quite high. After the Civil War, new revenue sources they start to develop, such as taxes on alcohol and tobacco, excise taxes. But it's really not until we get the income tax in 1913, which I think is unfortunate for a number of reasons. But one great thing it does is it means we no longer have to use the tariff as a main source of revenue. That does create some interesting dynamics in that now tariffs can be used exclusively for protectionism. Whereas in the past, they were kind of a protectionist measure sometimes, a revenue measure sometimes. They now become much more a tool for protectionism. But I think that what we then see during the Great Depression is that even though tariffs are no longer needed for much revenue, they are used as a huge attempt to protect the U.S. economy during the Great Depression. Other countries try this too, and it really spirals the world deeper into the Depression than it had already been. And as economic historians look back at this now, this is one of the clearest things which made things worse among all the bad things that were done during the 1930s.
So so you kind of addressed the 1930s. Let's look at the 1890s, right? This period that Trump points to and says this is the time period of human history. Was it really all that great? Was it better or worse? What was the story then?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of kind of relative ways to look at it. And if we just look at average income per person, adjusted for inflation, or average wealth, we're way wealthier now than we were in the 1890s. And it's not even close, right? If you look at how much revenue the federal government's collecting, they collect way more revenue now. I mean, it's not even close. And as a classical liberal, I worry about that to some extent. But if we're trying to say, both the people and the government, when did they have more money? It's clearly way more now. The 1890s, though, I mean, the 19th century is a period of tremendous economic growth. By the 1890s, we're much richer than we were in the 1790s. But the 1890s also are not, for people who study that period, known as a particularly good time, even though we'd had a lot of growth before that. There are many financial panics in the 1890s. There are several recessions in the 1890s. It is not a particularly good decade, even though it did follow a long period of growth after the Civil War. And there's a lot of important innovation happening at that time period. It's not all bad, but it's not, as I look at it, it's not obviously in any way a decade we want to return to, either policy-wise or in terms of how well people are doing.
MAGA seems to have a kind of a fixation on that there was a period in time where we need to get back to. Make America Great Again just implies that there was a golden age in American history. And, whenever you ask them when this golden age was, they never really want to tell you. And was there ever a time in American history that the average American was better off than now? And I can't imagine you'd say anything other than absolutely not.
Well, let me just first say that, I think every political philosophy has some of this nostalgia for the past. Even classical liberals and libertarians, well, the government was much smaller, etc. But, I think, 1890s or sometimes the 1950s and 60s, both, MAGA and many on the left look back and say this was a golden age of manufacturing, more stable families, lower crime, all these things. And I think that, I would not say on every measure 2025 is the best time to be alive. But I would say on most measures, especially economic measures, this is, if you're going to be born at any time in world history, anywhere in the world, you'd want to be born in America in 2025. I mean, I think with all the problems we have, both political and cultural and some economic, I think I would say that all things considered, now is the best time, even though there's lots of things we can fix and make better. I don't, I get nostalgia for particular things, right? Like family values may have in some ways been better in the 1950s. Okay, I can see why conservatives might have wanted that. Unions were stronger. I can see why liberals would have wanted that. The government was smaller than it was now, so I can see why libertarians might like the 1950s or the 1890s. Certainly, government's much smaller, but still, there are many things. Not only with the growth in wealth, but the growth in rights for many groups beyond just white males. I mean, there's lots of things that are just so much better now that I don't see why anyone would want to return to any time in the past, even though I think you can look at any decade and say there are things we can learn from that decade as we're trying to reform policy or reform things socially. We can always learn from the past, but taken as a whole, now is the best time. The good old days
I
are now.
it's funny to me that they associate the prosperity of the 19 or 1890s with the high rates of tariffs, but they don't associate the massive amount of prosperity in the 50s and 60s after World War II with the low tariff rates, because that was really the beginning, right? As World War II is coming to a close, you start to see a massive decline in the rates of tariffs, not only in the U.S. but around the world. And that really was what would you not call that a great instigator of that prosperity in the 50s, 60s, and 70s?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you look at average tariff rates, either for the US or worldwide, it's kind of a slow decline from, 1947, wait till you get to the 1990s by the point that they're just so low in most cases, except for, certain exceptions. And yeah, and I think, especially if you think about, America as a powerhouse manufacturing center in the 1950s and 60s, a lot of that's because Europe's still rebuilding, they're still in rubble. And the fact that tariffs are being lowered, meaning we could export a lot to them, right? That we were a manufacturing superpower that exported a lot to the rest of the world. And a lot of that was made possible by freer trade than we'd had in the past or for most of our history. So I think that is a big piece of it that, that for some reason they don't like that part of it, even though you don't bring up the things you don't like. Like, look at the things that I do like from some decade in the past. The other thing with the 1890s is, tariffs have been quite high throughout the 19th century, again, because it's a major revenue source. But the 1890 McKinley tariff, which was Trump points to sometimes, that was a really big increase in tariffs on some goods, but also a lot of things, they actually exempted tons of things from tariffs that used to be taxed. So things like sugar, they reduced, I think it may even eliminated a lot of taxes on tariffs on sugar. So on some things, they increased tariffs by 50%. On others, they cut them dramatically. And there was a big debate about, in the late 1880s and early 1890s about actually what the government should do with the big surplus they had, both from all the tariff revenue and all the new excise tax revenue. So I think when Trump looks back and sees it, he sees that oh, look, there was this debate about what to do with all this money. But, number one, that was kind of a weird historical accident. And number two, government was just so much smaller then, right? So the fact that they had a surplus, mostly that's not because of tariffs. That's because you had a big new source of revenue in excise taxes that was building up, and the government was just very small in the 1890s. So I think that there's no clear thing we can learn from that would apply to or is even anywhere near what Trump is doing now, right?
Yeah, when you have a government that is a fraction of the size it is today in terms of the size of our GDP, I think you can get away with a lot more. And it looks, the sum of money that you'd have to raise from tariffs. I hear this idea all the time that Trump's going to get rid of the income tax, and with by replacing it with tariffs. I look at that idea and go, exactly where do you think that amount of money is going to come from tariffs? Because the amount of money that the government raises through income tax is a multitude larger than I think even our entire revenue or our entire trade. Sorry, I think it's like $3 trillion is our total amount of trade with our foreign trade, or somewhere around there. And the federal government takes what, $6 trillion, $7 trillion a year to fund. And so how exactly are you going to tax that? Because the more you tax something, especially imports and exports, the more you tax that, the more it's going to go down. That's raise the cost of things, the fewer people are going to buy it.
Yeah, there is. I mean, there'd be no way to fund the current government at its current size or anywhere near its current size solely with tariffs. There's just no way to do it. I mean, you would have to have the rates be so high that imports would just dry up. But I think you could say, well, what if he uses this new revenue to lower income tax rates somewhat, right? Okay, maybe he generates $500 billion and then we cut income taxes by $500 billion. First of all, I don't think they would actually do that. I think that they would just keep them both, income tax and the new tariffs, and either find something to do with the money, or maybe have a smaller budget deficit. I don't actually believe they would reduce income tax rates. But even then, it's not clear. As bad as the income tax is, it's not actually clear that it's any more harmful than the tariffs, especially with the rates they'd have to do to generate any sizable amount of revenue. So, yeah, I'm as much as I'm a proponent of getting rid of bad taxes and replacing them with more efficient taxes in general. I like that idea, and I've advised our state government in Arkansas to do that in several different ways. They don't always take my advice, but I'll gladly take tax trade-offs if they're actually going to do that. And if they are actually replacing an inefficient tax with a better tax, because I think you can say there are taxes that are better and worse. But I just don't believe they would do it, or they do it in any magnitude that would actually matter and make a difference.
It'll be interesting to see how people kind of sell the Trumpian vision, because every time Trump does something, you hear about 5 different stories on what the purpose is, where the end goal is, and what it's gonna lead to from his supporters. So as things narrow down, it'll be interesting to see what the next excuse is.
Yeah, those goalposts just keep moving, aren't they?